Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the 100 Proof News Hound, and we're here with another episode of the 100 Years and More Show. Today, we're going back exactly 100 years to January 1926, and we're going to look at January 1926 from a very unique perspective. We're going down south. We're going to go to Atlanta, Georgia, and see what Dixie was like in the 1920s, for better or for worse. But before we go, I got to give you just a little bit of background information so you know who you're dealing with. Atlanta at that point in time had about 275,000 people. There were 700,000 people in metro Atlanta if we count the surrounding counties. Today, there's over 6.5 million people in Atlanta. Atlanta is now 10 times the size it was in the 1920s. The other major demographic thing you have to realize is that, well, Atlanta and Georgia have been remarkably consistent since the Civil War. The black-white population divide has always been 45% to 55%, 45% black, 55% white, somewhere around there. And one thing you've got to realize is that those two entities operated as entirely different societies. There was very little interaction. When we look at the newspapers of the time, the black population of Atlanta, which would have been 350,000 of the 700,000 or so, is absolutely ignored. They're not editorialized at, they're not advertised to, they're not looked at as consumers or as potential laborers. They just exist, but they're not part of white society. And that's how they're treated in the newspapers. The only time when there's real interaction and the only time they become the subject of a newspaper article is when the criminal justice system is involved. And we'll get into several of those cases. But not everything's bad. Southern society was different, but not totally bad. Give you an idea of where we're coming from here. The motto of the Atlanta Journal newspaper was, "The Journal covers Dixie like the dew." Can't say that sort of thing now, but that was the sentiment back then. Now, the first article we're going to deal with has nothing to do with the race, thank God, but it does have to do with death. And the headline in the Atlanta Journal, January 1, 1926, is "Auto Death Toll in 1925, far over the previous year." The automobile took a far heavier toll on human life in 1925 than in the previous year, figures gathered by the Associated Press indicate. And what it indicated is that there were 787 motor vehicle deaths in the Chicago area, 295 in Philadelphia, and 395 in Detroit. I did the math so you don't have to. If you go by numbers of cars on the road and the percentage of people that own the vehicles and miles driven, if you do those calculations, the death rate for automobile accidents was more than 10 times what it is now in 1926. In 2026, if we had the same fatality rate, there would be nearly 400,000 of automobile deaths on American highways as compared to the 35 to 40,000 that will happen in actuality. The automobile was an incredibly dangerous machine, but that meant there's opportunity. It's always supply and demand. The deaths are the demand and the supply. Well, it's insurance. The concept of automobile and death by automobile insurance is a real thing in 1926. And who leads the way? Well, the Atlanta Journal itself. Headline, January 31st, 1926. "You may be killed or injured in an automobile, streetcar, or other vehicle, or while walking on the streets. For your family's sake, take out today the Atlanta Journal insurance of $7,500 for only $1 per year." So they're going to give you $250,000 worth of coverage for $1 a year. And for that dollar, not only do you get benefits if you die, but they've got a whole schedule of schedules here. There's different amounts owing if you die by way of a streetcar, train, or steamship, or if you die by taxi cab or buses, or if you're killed in a normal automobile. There's even a $10 a week, which is $300 a week, short-term disability policy included in that $1 premium. How dangerous was society back then? Well, there's headlines that you just can't believe. The public accepted a far higher degree of risk in life than we'd be willing to tolerate now. Here's a headline from the Atlanta Journal, January 1st, 1926. "Baby killed in crib as broken flywheel wrecks 4 houses." What the heck is all that about? What's a flywheel? I know, so I'll tell you. A flywheel is a heavy rotating mechanical device that stores rotational energy to smooth out power delivery in machines. Your car has a flywheel connecting the motor to the transmission. But the flywheels we're talking about here are those giant industrial ones. If you've ever seen a steam engine, they could be 12, 15 feet high, weighing 10,000 pounds or more, rotating at 1,000 RPM. It powers, once you get those things going, it powers the entire factory. until it doesn't. And in this one, a broken belt caused the wheel to fly into sections. Those sections went flying through the wall of the factory, and it is noted that a baby was killed and 4 other persons were injured Friday when a section of a flywheel, which had been ripped apart in a Northside Carnegie steel mill, crashed into 4 nearby residences, causing damage estimated at $330,000. You're just sitting there in your own house, and all heck breaks loose, and 1,000-pound pieces of metal come flying through your wall at 200 miles an hour. That was a normal occurrence in 1926 America. Unfortunately, what was also a normal occurrence was political corruption and graft. We got an interesting article here, the Atlanta Journal, on January 12, 1926. And it's about a fellow named John W. Langley. Now, John W. Langley had been born in Kentucky, but he'd spent the last 20 years of his life in Washington, D.C. And why was he in D.C. for 20 years? Well, he was a 10-time incumbent congressman from the state of Kentucky, but he was also a magician. And what do I mean by that? Well, he discovered a magic trick. By merely signing his name on a certain piece of paper, he could convert alcohol that had been produced for medicinal purposes only into alcohol that could be sold on the wider market, as long as he got a piece of the action. And so, not only was he a magician, he had mastered that the biblical trick of feeding the masses with fish and loaves. In that he had managed on his $7,500 a year salary to deposit $115,000 into his bank account over the past 3 years. Well, even the feds couldn't tolerate that, and he was tried and convicted. It says here, Langley is coming to town to serve 2 years in Atlanta prison. He's been sent to the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary for 2 years. But this being politics and graft being what it may, his wife would run for his vacant seat, so he didn't lose the income. And then when he got out, he'd get a presidential pardon and go right back to doing the kinds of things he was doing before. Not the only bit of graft and corruption we've got in the Atlanta Journal in January of 1926. We got the January 11th, 26 article, Boykin Probe Hints in Slot Machine War. And what this is all about, it was a pay-to-play scheme. And by that, we've got here what they say, documentary evidence indicating that certain unnamed officials in Atlanta were paid hard cash as an entrance fee before they would permit the operation of slot machines in the city was being investigated by the Attorney General. What was happening is you had to pay the powers that be in order to allow your slot machine to be placed in restaurants and bars throughout the city. It's just the cream being skimmed off the top by the politicians. It kind of reminds me, and people weren't. Well, it was expected that would happen. It's kind of like that scene in Casablanca where Captain Renault comes from the blackjack table, and he says to Rick, I'm amazed to find gambling going on in your establishment, just at the same time he's being handled a stack of his winnings by the croupier. That's about how unusual graft in politics was at that time. And it goes on and on. Article January 19th, 1926. Policeman is exonerated in slot machine bribe probe. 41 more indictments are voted, however, by the jury, the grand jury. That's just the revolving wheel of justice at that time. Hundreds would be charged. Charges would routinely get dropped. You'd press charges on people just to put pressure on them and hope to get a confession. And that's what's going on here. The policeman is exonerated, but they're going to charge 41 more guys for the same type of offense. And it goes on at the national level as well. Here's the article of January 26, 1926. 13 Coast Guardsmen among 61 indicted in Bill Dwyer's alleged rum-running ring. Officer of Cutter drew down $8,400 true bill charges, and that's the bill of indictment from the grand jury. And so the Coast Guard's in on the action. Everybody's in on the action. The whole system doesn't make any sense. The only people that aren't in on the action, I guess, are the old-time distillers and brewers who have gone out of business. There are some rational people in society, though, in the late 1920s, and they realized what the Volstead Act and Prohibition have done to society. And we have an article here from the Atlanta Journal on January 18th, 1926. Wet Committee, 56 strong, calls for House rally. Modification is inevitable, Chairman Hill says in general appeal. And what they were getting on board, they weren't so bold as to say, let's repeal Prohibition, but they wanted to allow the production of beer and low alcohol wines, to keep the prohibition on the hard liquor, which from a moralistic standpoint was causing more damage anyways. They just wanted, there's just some great There's some great old photos in the 1920s where you got businessmen in suits walking with placards saying, "We want beer." That's all they wanted. At the end of a hard day's work, they just wanted to be able to have a beer. And the government wouldn't let them. And that was leading to all kinds of corruption and murders. And, well, we did our Purple Gang episode last week. Go back and view that if you want to see what can really go wrong in the city. Now, if everything you've learned about race relations in the Deep South is by watching movies. Now, and I mean movies like In the Heat of the Night, I Was a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, To Kill a Mockingbird. The actuality of it is a little more complex than that. This is an interesting article in the Columbus, Georgia Ledger-Inquirer, January 1, 1926. And it's a summary of the people on death row. Who are they? By what race? What crime did they commit? First thing they have there is, this is great. It's the headline, List of the Doomed. That's where there's 18 guys on death row and they outline who they are and what crimes they've committed. But the headline of List of the Doomed is so ominous. I wish people wrote that well today. So who's condemned to die? There's 18 guys on death row. Remember that it's 40% black, 60% white, 45, 55. It's in that range. So you've got 18 people on death row. Statistically, you should have 11 whites and 7 blacks. That's what should be on death row out of 18 people. But if you've read To Kill a Mockingbird or watched I Was a Fugitive from a Chain Gang or any of those things, you probably would assume that it was, instead of being 11 to 7 white, it would be 15 to 3 black, but it's not. It was actually 13 to 5 white. There were 13 whites on death row and only 5 blacks on death row. The whites were overrepresented on death row by about 30%. Then they break it down further. Of the people on death row, 14 were there for murder and 4 were there for rape. So you've watched To Kill a Mockingbird, so obviously you would think that all 4 of the fellows that are being charged with rape would be blacks having raped white women. Exactly wrong. It says here, 14 of those were convicted of murder and 4 of attacks on women. All 4 of those convicted of attacks on women were white men. The 4 white guys were convicted of rape and were waiting for sentencing. The exact opposite of what one would have been led to believe. I'm not saying for a second that race relations were good and that the criminal justice system was efficient. I'm just suggesting, based on the statistics that I've just been handed here, that the actuality of the situation was far more complex than we've been led to believe. And we have, fortunately, a story that outlines the entire thing. We go from the highs to the lows to the in-between, all with a couple of murders here. Columbus Ledger, January 8th, 1926. Headline is Glass accuses member of mob. Okay, now who is Glass and what's he got to do with this? What happened was Glass was the sheriff in Clarksdale, Mississippi. And there was a trial in Clarksdale, Mississippi where one Lindsay Coleman was accused of murdering Grover C. Nicholson, plantation store manager, of the plantation. I guess he must be the black version of the Tennessee Williams song where he sold his soul to the company store. So this guy, Nicholas is running the company store, and Coleman is accused of murdering him. They have a trial in Clarksdale, Mississippi, in front of an all-white jury, and Lindsay Coleman is acquitted. He's about to walk free. And I use the word about because that's where we get into Sheriff Glass. It says here, Sheriff Glass yesterday was fined $500, the maximum penalty. Glass pled guilty to a charge of failing to arrest persons administering third degree to prisoners in his care. That takes a lot of unpacking. What happened was Glass is the sheriff. Coleman is acquitted. And as he's walking out of the courthouse, 4 men accost him and start beating him. Glass stands back and doesn't arrest the 4 men, and he allows the 4 men to drag the recently acquitted out of his courtroom, where he is taken to some woods some distance away and he's shot. Now, lynching does not just apply to hanging. Lynching is the technical term for any time vigilantism where you take the law in your own hand and kill an accused. These were members These were members of Nicholas's family, extended family, and they obviously went out and killed Mr. Coleman. But the sheriff is fined for not doing his job, and the judge says, you're not removed from office, but he's lectured by the judge, who said he would give Dr. Glass another chance to show his mettle, that he's a real man, that he's not just a wimp. It sounds like the criminal justice system is trying to some extent. They've acquitted him of the murder, and they're criticizing and fining with what is the equivalent of a $15,000 fine the sheriff for not doing his job. But Kane is arrested. A fellow by the name of G.O. Kane is arrested and charged with murder in connection with the lynching of Lindsay Coleman. It says here, the jury was completed today after 59 veneer men had been examined. Only 3 of the 59 examined were excused for cause, and the state exercised only 5 peremptory challenges. The defense exercised none. Each side was allowed 12. So the jury is sat. As far as I can see, 12 white folks. And now we're back in Clarksdale, Mississippi, with a white man on trial for killing a black. If we go back to our Purple Gang episode, the prosecutor in Detroit lamented that it's tough to get a conviction. To get a conviction, you got to either have an eyewitness or you got to have a confession. And here you got an eyewitness. You got, not only is he an eyewitness, he's the lead law enforcement official in the entire county. It's Glass. It says Glass accuses member of mob, tells of rescue attempt. It says here, Dr. S.W. Glass, recused sheriff of Oklahoma County, today identified Geo Kane charged with murder in connection with the recent lynching of Lindsay Coleman, Negro, as one of the men who seized Coleman after he had been acquitted of a charge of murder. You've got the sheriff, the county sheriff, saying, this is the man. Goes to jury. And what do you think happens? Well, almost anything could happen. First off, the jury is deadlocked. They don't come back the same day, and the judge tells them to keep on trying, and they're out for 27 hours. They're really trying. This is not, 12 angry men or anything, but they are actually trying to come to a conclusion. You get the impression that there were a few guys, say 4 or 5, that wanted actual justice, and the rest were just voting their feelings, their emotions, because Kane acquitted in lynching case. Mississippi jury frees man accused of killing Negro. Verdict delayed 27 hours. So they tried. They were there for 27 hours, but they acquitted. So in this one case, you've got a black man being acquitted for the murder of a white man, and a white man being acquitted for the murder of a black man. The criminal justice system works in mysterious ways in Georgia in 1926. But sometimes there's international fish to fry, and this is where we get into an interesting thing here. What one should realize is that, remember the Red Scare from the 1950s? Well, there really were a lot of card-carrying communists who answered to Moscow, involved in the entertainment industry as well as government in the 1940s and 1950s. But that's not where it begins. Atlanta Journal, January 15th, 1926. U.S. hunting red agents in American women's clubs. Strange place to be looking for spies, but they must be there. A nationwide investigation of charges that women's clubs throughout the country are honeycombed by secret agents of the communist movement is underway, according to information gleaned from the offices here. Leading club members of this city are working to stamp out the alleged Soviet conspiracy. It sounds real. And it says serious attention is being given to this matter by the United States District Attorney's Office here. The federal officers in the East have been asked to aid. So there we are, the beginning of the communist movement infiltrating American society in 1926 at women's clubs. Here's another thing we don't get a lot of anymore, for good, bad, or otherwise. Public execution as sport, or public execution as a form of entertainment. Here's the headline in the Atlanta Journal, Friday, January 29th, 1926. Jones and Bloodworth hanged on same gallows for murder of salesman. Youthful slayers sing and pray as they await drop. Farewell sermon by Jones and prayers on scaffold bring spectators to tears. Well, what could all that be about? This is an execution. Well, here's farewell speech. He goes, yes, Sheriff, I want to say something, and I'm glad of the opportunity before it is too late. It said, the last words on my lips last night as I went to bed were, thy grace is sufficient, and now I know how serious it is to be able to stand on the brink of eternity and rejoice. The flesh is weak, but the spirit is strong. I'm glad there came a time in my life when I found my way to the cross and found strength to go through with this ordeal. Pretty eloquent for a 19-year-old convicted murderer. We don't get, for good, bad, or otherwise, we don't get televised executions anymore, probably for the good. But if they can result in a little bit of eloquence, maybe once in a while wouldn't be a bad thing. I'll tell you one thing that is a bad thing. Do not interfere. Do not get in the way of a Georgia woman and her property rights in January 1926. Here's the article, the Atlanta Journal, January 29, 1926. Georgia woman freed of charge of killing man in yard at night. It says Mrs. Maggie Gerganius, and she's got to be Greek, of Lanor County, who shot and killed Enoch Hall on December 4th when the sheriff in Hall, who was deputized to raid her home, so they're going there to arrest her, went there and they were walking about her premises after she warned them to go away. It was tried in Lakeland Thursday and she was found not guilty. The jury was out about 10 minutes. Well, what the heck happened and why was it so definitive? It says here, Miss Gerganis claimed she'd been bothered by chicken thieves, and when she heard people walking about her yard, she called for them to leave. When the noise continued, she went into the yard and was returning to her house when she says Hall stepped between her and her door. She thought she was being held up, she said, and she shot him dead. And the jury took 10 minutes to acquit her. Do not get in between a person and their property rights in Georgia in 1926. Now, the next two articles could be under the heading of you think you've had a bad day? Or the disaster of the month. Take your pick. Here we go. Oh, this is a mining disaster, and we went through a detailed analysis of mining disasters back in our February 2015 episode. So if you want a more detailed explanation of what went on, go back to that one. But here we have headline, 2 saved alive. Mine blast death toll is put at 91. Rescued man tells of crawling 23 hours over many dead bodies. People get PTSD now from watching a contentious episode of Real Housewives. Imagine what this gentleman went through. It says here, 2 men were rescued alive Thursday from the lower levels of mine number 21 of the Degnan-Makani Mining Company, where an explosion Wednesday entombed 101 miners. A fire which for a while halted the recovery of bodies was extinguished shortly before noon, and rescue crews were again able to enter the mine. 91 men are dead or unaccounted for. Then, a couple days later, January 30th, 1926, 27 miners killed in Alabama blast. Bodies recovered. All victims were identified. Burial will begin Sunday in stricken communities. It says the accident was said to have been caused by a windy shot. This accident was described as a misfiring of the black powder, the charge blowing backward instead of forward as it was intended. It is presumed that dust and not gas constituted the major factor in the explosion, and that most of the victims suffered death by the force of the blast, by the sheer shockwave of it all. People put their lives on the line in industrial situations all the time in the 1920s. If the rate of death was 10 times more in automobiles back then, it's even worse. It was even worse than industrial accidents, yet it was tolerated. I don't know whether the human life wasn't valued to the level that we do today or what the explanation was, but my goodness, life was dangerous back then. Hey, and if you think false news is a new thing, here's an interesting article in the Atlanta Journal, January 3rd, 1926. New Shah of Persia reported dying after bomb blows off legs. That seems like it'd be pretty easy to verify. Either it happened or it didn't. It says here, an exchange telegraph dispatch from Baghdad said it was rumored that a bomb had been thrown here at night. The new Shah blowing off both of his legs. The dispatch said it was feared he would die. Well, probably would if it had happened. This is the Shah's father. Remember the Shah from 1979, the one the Khomeini and the mullahs gave the boot to? This was his father, and he lived into the 1950s before dying of natural causes and being taken, and the Shahness being taken over by his son. But who knows? Maybe we'll get a new Shah. What with the new rioting that's going on in Tehran, if things break the right way, maybe the Shah comes back. Things do change though, and here's the next 5 pages. We got 5 full-page ads here of automobiles. The ads are for automobiles, but they're for automobiles that no longer exist. And I'll give you a little explanation here. The first one is for the Willis Knight. Super efficiency in a beautiful setting. Sheer unbeatable motor merit in a car of commanding luxury is winning more and more staunch adherents to this superb automobile every day. Well, the Willis Knight doesn't exist, obviously. What you should realize is that in the early 1920s, there were about 210 companies producing automobiles in America, and by 1935, there were 13. And the Willis Knight Company was no longer with us. Willis, actually, though, in the early 1940s, began producing Jeeps for the Army. They call them Willys, but it's Willis Jeeps. They were eventually absorbed. The company was eventually absorbed with Nash, Packard, and Studebaker, forming American Motors in the 50s. Second car. Now there's a Peerless for everyone. The Peerless franchise is open in the city. They have the powerful 672, the remarkable 680, and the big engine, the 90 V-Type 869. So it's a 90-degree right angle V8, the most powerful kind of engine imaginable at that time, and it's being put into the new Peerless automobiles. So they just disappeared from the face of the earth. Now we have an ad here for Nash's. It says 25% greater power and new quietness and responsive. Nash is one of the companies that merged with Willis, Packard, and Studebaker to form American Motors. And then we have the wonderful-looking Oakland 6, now a real sports roadster for $1175. It says here it's a companion car to the Pontiac 6. Well, Pontiac continued on until just a few years ago, but the Oakland company left the track about 7 decades ago. And finally, we have here more power and superior quality. with a Durant Motor Company automobile. The Durant, we did one of our episodes on William C. Durant, one of the most amazing men in America, and he founded, among other things, Chevrolet and General Motors. And after he got tossed out of General Motors for the last time, he started his own automobile company, which is this, Durant Motors. It eventually tanked, and he lost all his money in the stock market crash of 29 and ended up destitute, even though at one point in time he was worth several $billion. And don't let that happen to you. Now we're off the front pages, we're off the local news, we're moving our way through the newspaper. Now we're into the sports section. Here we have an article, the Atlanta Journal, Saturday, January 2nd, 1926. And what happens right after what happens just before January 2nd, January 1st? That means bowl games, the Rose Bowl. It says here, Tide brings South greatest grid honors. Washington juggernaut is stopped in Thriller 2019. So Alabama went out and played Washington in the Rose Bowl and beat them by a point. And it was the first of their, now 11 undefeated teams. And this is really the turning point for Alabama football. They were a pretty good team before, but after this, they became a great team year after year after year, and they continued to the present, to the point where for highest winning percentage in the history of college football, you're looking at Alabama and Ohio State with Michigan just behind them. So this is where it all began, though, in the 1926 Rose Bowl. The next article in the sports section is kind of what could have been if there hadn't been a communist revolution in Cuba. If Fidel Castro had made the major leagues and hadn't led the revolution in the 50s in Cuba. Because here's the headline: Tech down by Havana U after battle, gets even break on Cuban floors, leaves for New Orleans. Georgia Tech played Havana, Cuba, in basketball in Havana on January 2nd, 1926, and Havana beat them. If Cuba had just been allowed to become what Cuba could have become, it would have been a combination of Vegas and Miami. Instead, it is what it is. But man, they were playing collegiate basketball in 1926. We now have the article, or next have the article of America's premier sports writer of January 10th, 1926. It's called "The Sportlight" by Grantland Rice. And I'm just going to read a section of this to you and just let you ponder the proposition that people were a whole lot smarter back then. They weren't better educated by schooling, but they must have had a greater command of the English language, because this is just some fine writing. The first thing he does is he quotes a drama critic on what's wrong with America. And this is pretty funny. Are you aware that the USA is the most drunken nation on earth, that it consumes more hard liquor, uses more rouge, wears less clothing, commits more murders, holdups, and adulteries, is scented by more perfume, keeps later hours, that naked women are to be witnessed in New York reviews nightly, that never in our history have we been so unchaste, ribald, dissipated, law-breaking, and generally hell-bent, to which Grantland Rice replies in relation to college football, because an earlier statement was made in support of an argument that college football was basically a den of iniquity. Whereupon a flock of reformers rise up and starts swatting football, one of the few national institutions that has nothing to do with lounge lizards, perfumery, hard liquor, holdups, nakedness, and ribaldry at large. The great human comedy must go on. So Grantland Rice was a major figure in American journalism for decades, and we don't really have that sort of thing anymore, where there's a national written sports celebrity like they did in the 20s. I think we've lost something there. The next section we're just going to bridge technology and entertainment, and that brings us to radio. Have the full page here of the Atlanta Journal, page 7, Sunday, January 10th, 1926. It's the Journal's radio section, just showing you here, just in a general way, how important radio is now becoming to Americans in the mid-1920s. It's taken over from nothing, because it's a brand new industry. If we were going to do a stock market thing, RCA is the giant tech stock of the day, doubling in value every 6 months. Radio is the big deal. And the article here of January 3rd, 1926 of the Atlanta Journal points that out. 1925 developments show radio is not a plaything. Many prejudices smashed. The gist of the article is that radio's here to stay. It has millions of subscribers. People love the entertainment value of it. It's mostly music and talk radio at this point in time. There's not really a lot of drama on the radio, and there soon will be in the next couple of years. But even then, it's become a major part of everybody's life. One of the things that has helped that is this. It says chain broadcasting. Well, that's networks. It says here, in the meantime, chain broadcasting, which was introduced by AT&T, the AT&T in 1924, was growing by leaps and bounds. They note that they're cobbling together 7 to 10 different networks, that the major events like the inauguration, the World Series, and the bowl games in football are being broadcast coast to coast, and this is already there. By 1926, that's all in play. But people can't let a good thing just alone. You always have people who want to meddle. You always have people who want to regulate. And what you've got here, and this is, people don't understand this, the regulation, the urge for regulation doesn't come from the populace. The urge from regulation comes from companies that are already in the door. What you do with regulation makes the point of entry very expensive. If you say you've got to have a transmitter of so many watts, that it has to be such quality, that you have to have certain amount of facilities, that you have to provide this service and that service, it raises the cost of entry for a competitor to a prohibitive amount. And that's exactly what the radio station owners want. So not anyone else, petition Washington for regulation. And it says here, in this frame of mind, it took but 3 days under the direction of Secretary of Commerce Hoover to ask unanimously that supervision of radio be placed in the hands of the government, and that certain limitations and regulations be placed on wireless communication that would enable radio to proceed without it being strangled by its own rapid progress. Bull. Absolute bull. They were not going to be strangled by nothing. What they want is protection, and that's what the radio stations have gone to government. That's what government will provide, because it's in every one of those people's best interest. Governments love to regulate because it gives them power, and major corporations love regulation because it stops guys like you and me from starting our own businesses. Final note on radio: if you were to replace the word tube with chip, it would make the same sense today. It says tube monopoly feared in the United States. Fear of another stranglehold on the radio tube business like that controlled by RCA is expressed again today. Same nonsense. They talk about RCA having the patents on the tubes that are being used at the present time, and they're not letting the competitors use the tubes and charging exorbitant this and that. Monopolies don't get broken by government regulation. Monopolies get broken by competition. What happens here, and what happens in virtually every monopoly situation, is a smarter guy comes along. There's rooms full of engineers and laboratories producing better, different tubes, different ways of transmitting, better speakers, better antennas, and they're going to produce a better product, and the market will slap RCA down. That's what happens. If you try to meddle in it by government regulation, you just create more problems than you're even thinking you can solve. And then we end up where we are today with more regulations. People, as I said, as the common notion is that people violate 20 or 30 laws every day and you have no idea you're violating the laws. But that's what it is, regulations. Now we're full blown into the entertainment section here. We got an interesting headline. On January 9th, 1926, in the Atlanta Journal, Broadway honeymooners, Berlins and the Selwyns take sweets on Leviathan. What's the Leviathan? Well, we've already dealt with that. We dealt with a case where the purser for the Leviathan was smuggling in $50,000 worth of diamonds. You go back in our back catalog and see that. But the Leviathan is one of the big ocean liners, bigger than the Titanic. And who are the Broadway honeymooners? Well, it's songwriter Irving Berlin and his bride. And why is everyone so curious? They just got married, and it's a mixed marriage. No, not white and black. He's an immigrant Jewish guy, and she's the heiress of a Catholic fortune. So that's got the public totally fascinated. It is kind of cool. The father of the bride just didn't want his daughter marrying an immigrant Jewish guy, no matter how popular he was. And again, he was one of the richest guys in America. But you know what? Irving Berlin was such a nice guy that he even came around eventually. The marriage would last until 1988. So it was hard, and no one was being a gold digger either way in this particular one. What one should realize is just how big a deal Irving Berlin was at one time. Now, that's just a name from the past right now, but Irving Berlin, I'm just going to give you just a smattering of who he was. He wrote Alexander's Ragtime Band. He wrote Blue Skies, Blue Skies. Remember Willie Nelson did a version of Blue Skies in the late 70s? He wrote that. He wrote Putting on the Ritz. When Frankenstein Monsters starts dancing and Young Frankenstein to Putting on the Ritz, that's Irving Berlin. I've Got My Love to Keep Me Warm. No Business Like Show Business. And then the biggies, the big songs so big you don't even think they were written by humans. He wrote White Christmas and God Bless America. I didn't know anyone wrote God Bless America. God Bless America is it was the national anthem for a while. And White Christmas is still the most popular song on a yearly basis for number of plays. What were the copyrights on that material worth in the 1920s and 30s? God only knows. And Irving Berlin's wife and father-in-law know. Hey, what was playing down at the theater? Well, this is a good one here. Down in the Atlanta Journal, Sunday, January 3rd, 1926, is the first ad for The Phantom of the Opera, starring Lon Chaney. Now, The Phantom of the Opera is not that musical. That musical version is a 1990s confection. Phantom of the Opera was the film adaptation of Gaston Leroux's 1910 novel about a phantom at the opera and his supposed girlfriend and all that kind of craziness, right? An interesting background story on that is that the president of Universal Pictures was on vacation in Paris in 1924 and actually ran into Gaston Leroux. And over drinks, they were talking about the book and film rights, and he bought the film rights off the author personally. Now, they cast Lon Chaney in it, not Lon Chaney Jr. They cast Lon Chaney, and he's the man of 1,000 faces. And he was responsible for his own makeup. And when that mask is removed, and hopefully we got a photograph of it right now, when that mask is removed, they said men screamed and women fainted. It was such a horrific image on the screen. It was reissued. The film was reissued in 1930 with sound because it was made in 1926 without sound, obviously. 1930, that sound, the musical accompaniment and the appropriate screams. You know, I've got this theory that, especially with respect to a silent movie, if you go to IMDb and a silent movie being rated by modern audiences rates at 7.0 or higher, you're looking at a classic. Well, this rates at 7.5, which means it's in the stratosphere. It's in the top 10 of all time silent films. So it's also in the public domain. So when you're done this episode, why don't you just click it on and watch Phantom of the Opera? You'll get a kick out of it. Other things that are going on in the entertainment world that week, January 19th, 1926. Mrs. Rudolph Valentino granted divorce in Paris from Silver Sheet Chic. I didn't know that Rudolph Valentino had been married, but he got a divorce here. Millions of American women must have been thrilled. Now, he's only going to live another year or so. They didn't know that at the time, but millions must have been thrilled that he's back on the open market. What else is going on? W.C. Fields is in the news for about the first time. W.C. Fields, born in 1880, you know him, right? The guy with the red nose and the witty wisecracks. You know, never give a sucker an even break, and you can't cheat an honest man. Those kinds of sayings. Well, did you know he started off as a juggler? He started off as a vaudeville juggler and a silent juggler. His act was he never said a word. For 20 years, he's on the stage juggling, doing a comedic juggling act and never talking. He's kind of like Teller in the Penn and Teller thing. He doesn't talk, which is wild considering he makes his entire reputation in film through witty wisecracks. He finally gets on Broadway in 1923 in a show called Poppy, where he plays a con man, and he exhibits his verbal skills at that point in time, which gets Hollywood interested, and off he goes. It says here, The Old Army Game, Fields' first comedy. W.C. Fields, the comedian who couldn't get into the silent drama until he ended a career of 20 years of dumb pantomime, not speaking. On stage, he took a speaking role in Poppy, and his New York contract with the Follies ends in the middle of January, and he will begin work on The Old Army Game, his first screen starring vehicle, February 8th. So here he is. W.C. Fields is about to enter the film world, and him along with Mae West are going to become icons of the 1930s. This is just before that. We're out of entertainment. We're now onto the society pages. And those things, you mock it, but it existed. We've got a lovely picture here, the Atlanta Journal, January 10th, 1926. Society and its interests. It says here, hosts and number of guests at brilliant party given by Mr. Conklin. Have you ever given a brilliant party? I like to think I have. In this room that we're sitting in right now, I've had a couple parties with a Rolling Stone cover band in the corner, and that was pretty cool. And we've had some jazz ensembles playing here as well. So I like to think that I've given a brilliant party, but it's not for the host to judge whether the party was brilliant. It's for the guests. So they have a wonderful array of pictures here of all the young debutantes and young women who are attending the parties. And what's funny is they're all dressed identically. Everyone looks the same, and they all have the exact same hairstyle. Everyone's bobbed. Nobody has no woman here has hair longer than 4 inches long. But they give a summary of the parties that are going on, and we have it here on the January 10th article as well. It says college contingent dances announced of social interest. It says here the Pi Pi dance, and this is a sorority. It goes, the Pi Pi sorority of Washington Seminary that must have been a real thrill. They're a sorority at a seminary. Will entertain a formal dance Friday evening, January 15th at the Druid Hills Golf Club. I had to go look up what the heck Druid Hills is, and it's pretty cool. Now, Druid Hills was a high-end subdivision and then a high-end golf course in the Atlanta region in the early 19 teens and 20s. As a matter of fact, Bobby Jones, at the age of 15, won the club championship at the Druid Hills Golf Club. Now, it hosts quite a few different events, because here we have a little further on down, the Cotillion Club. One of the most interesting affairs of the college contingent will be the dance at which the members of the Cotillion Club of Georgia Tech will entertain Friday, January 22nd at the Druid Hills Golf Club. So I guess Druid Hills, it's kind of like all your magnets. If you were in Detroit, if you're an auto magnate, everyone, if it's 1910, 1920, you're going to go build your mansion out in Grosse Pointe. And if you're in LA, you're going to build your mansion in Beverly Hills. And if you're in Atlanta and you're an heir or an heiress to the Coca-Cola fortune, you're going to go build in Druid Hills. And we have the Atlanta Journal of January 10th, 1926, page 31, beautiful new homes in the Druid Hills section. And it specifies which homes owned by who, but it is a series of 4,500 to 5,000 square foot neo-colonials, I would call them. Wonderful homes on huge lots that are all still there today. The area's been named a National Historic District, and hopefully will always be there. Now, just before we get to the back, we've got a couple of, we're going to move through the want ads here. We're going to move through the classified section. The first ad we're going to look at is for employment, help wanted male, back when they used to do such a thing, men or women. And this is an excellent article. It's an advertisement before we had proved definitively the uselessness of a college education. How high could a person rise on merit alone? Well, look at this ad. Ambitious young man under 35, possibly employed but dissatisfied with future prospects, sounds like about every young man, to train for executive opportunity in the accounting profession. Well, what kind of education? What kind of a degree do they want you to have? Grammar school education essential. Well, you got to go to at least grade 8. They want to make sure you know how to add and subtract, because really, to be an accountant, that's what you got to know, adding and subtracting. Beyond that, you can be taught. They can teach you everything else you need to know. It says, if really looking for a worthwhile opportunity and willing to devote spare time under certified public accountants, write for personal interview, stating your age, education, employment, and your telephone number, and you too could be on your way to the top. No mention of college at all. Now, here's one. Get ready to get out your handkerchiefs. And have your heartstrings tugged, because this is a section I didn't know existed. Request for the needy. Let me just read a couple of them here. Mrs. B is the sole supporter of a crippled husband and son, 11 years old. A year ago, she had all her teeth extracted and has been unable to buy plates. $15 will pay for a set of teeth and will be a means of improving her health. 14-year-old boy needs winter underwear. A little 11-year-old girl in the family also needs a sweater. The father works hard but earns so small a wage he cannot buy clothing. Lawrence, age 7, has been wearing a ragged old sweater to school. Can you spare a winter coat for him? His mother has just returned from the hospital. And on it goes. My goodness. People think people are poor now. Now you just call the government. I need diapers. Can I book a massage? I'm feeling a little tense. This was poverty. This is poverty at a Dickensian level, and that's how they treated it, and that's how they dealt with it. Now, the newspaper ends, the Sunday edition of the newspapers end with 8 full pages of photographs of what events took place during the week. And I've reproduced 2 of the pages here. First, we have page 108 of January 31, 1926. And in the top left, well, we've got sailors rescuing, well, hardly rescuing, we're recovering the bodies of airmen after a plane crash. It turns out that the plane broke apart at 3,500 feet and crashed into the ocean, and these are the fellows out there recovering the bodies. And then in the top right, you got a fellow named Martin Durkin. And what did Martin Durkin do? Well, he's here with his 18-year-old Moll, because that's what they call her. He's been accused of shooting a federal agent as well as a Chicago police officer. I'm sure they have 8 or 10 feet of rope ready for him. And finally, on page 105 of the Atlanta Journal, we have two seaplanes here. It says 2 of the Navy's giant seaplanes, part of a squadron of 28 on their way to Panama for war games. They're going to simulate the attack on the Panama Canal. And then down in the lower right-hand corner, it says, what will the well-dressed co-ed be wearing this year? Well, apparently she's going to be wearing a derby hat and the exact same outfit as everybody else going to college at that time. Well, that's it. That's our week from page 1 to the back cover. We've covered everything there is to be covered, and that leaves us only one thing to do, and that's our themed cocktail. So today, we're going to have a peach tree cocktail in honor of Atlanta, Georgia. It's a good, refreshing summer drink. It involves 3 ounces of peach schnapps, 3/4 ounce of vodka, 3/4 ounce of fresh squeezed lime juice. Please squeeze it freshly. 3/4 ounce of fresh squeezed orange juice. Do the same. You're going to put them all into a cocktail shaker filled with ice. Shake for 20 seconds. Got to get the dilution and you got to get the temperature down. Then what you're going to do is you're going to take a highball glass, because I'm going to make this into a sipping drink. Take a highball glass, fill it 3/4 of the way with ice, and then strain in the cocktail from the cocktail shaker. And we're going to use a slice of peach as a garnish. This one you're entitled to drink with a straw, but not one of those wooden straws. Go to the back of the drawer and find one of the good old plastic ones, or better yet, a stainless steel straw, and enjoy your peach tree cocktail. Well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the show. Remember, like and subscribe. It's important for the development of the channel. And we'll see you again next week with another episode of the 100 Years More Show. Take care, everybody.